No one knows what the future holds, but if a new house is in your future, I can help from a safe distance. I'm Nick Acosta, your downtown expert, and I'm hosting safe and sanitary open houses. Nothing is different except for temperature checks at the door and masks are required. But it still smells like there are fresh baked cookies in the oven. So come on by one of my safe and sanitary open houses, and I'll say welcome home from 6 feet away.
This is Home2All, an all-inclusive real estate podcast with your host, Nicholas Acosta. Nick sits down with guests to talk about real estate and how it works. Reach him at downtown.expert on Facebook and Instagram, or his website, www.downtown.expert, or call or text him at 407-508-8809. Enjoy the episode.
Good afternoon, everybody. This is Nicholas Acosta, your host of the podcast, Home2All, an all-inclusive real estate podcast, coming to you live from St. Petersburg. Today, we're going to be talking about cyber liability. And for that, I have Mike Synthetic over at Blanchard Insurance, Ryan Forrester with Coalition. Welcome, guys, to the show. How are you today?
Hey, great, Nick. Thanks for having us.
Fantastic.
No worries.
Appreciate it.
No worries. So let's just go ahead and jump right in there, guys. So we know there's a lot of new trends. Mike, we were talking about it before the show and the last week also about cyber liability going on, and then also Ryan to chime in on that as well.
Yeah, I'm curious to get Ryan's thoughts on this because I saw an article just the other day. I think it was on AM Best, and it was a news brief about the rise in ransomware attacks are about 400%, and which is off the charts for any loss ratio, in our industry. So, Ryan, what are you seeing that's going on with ransomware attacks in the market right now?
Yeah, Mike, no, it's a fantastic question. I think it's one that's really at the top of mind. I mean, you saw what happened with the Colonial Pipeline. It's no longer just businesses. These are events that actually have impacts on humans now. I had friends in North Carolina that couldn't get gas for a few days, and so it's scary what's going on. But really, it's just, I think, bad actors taking advantage of just businesses that maybe don't even realize they have something that's vulnerable, something that can be exploited. And that's something that at Coalition we really try to tackle. It's not just the rise in ransomware, the demands have been skyrocketing. I mean, I think it's doubled since 2020 already. And that's really what's driving not only the amount of ransomware with the demands, but just the amount of claims. I think these bad actors are realizing, hey, I can make more money if I get into a network, as opposed to what's maybe happened in the past. Some of the most frequent claims of breaching credit card data and selling that online or trying to max out cards, they're realizing, hey, I can make a lot of money doing this. And I think that's been just as big of an issue. So,
are you seeing a lot of these ransomware attacks? Are they coming from overseas, or are they pretty much domestic, or where are they coming from?
So for the most part, they'd be overseas. What's really crazy about it is they are almost full-blown businesses. I mean, just as your company would work, they have essentially businesses over there where they are doing ransomware as a service. One huge issue we're seeing are not only are bad actors, once they get into a network and kind of figure out how they got in, how the business operates, they won't be the one to even deploy the ransomware. They'll actually go on essentially the dark web and sell it to another vendor that will go in and actually deploy the malware. So it's really crazy, the sophistication of these hackers. It's kind of scary to that point, but for the most part, they're overseas, and we even have data intelligence to kind of see exactly where the most activity comes in. That's what makes Coalition very unique. We have a lot of data collection and just threat intelligence information that we actually apply to our underwriting. And so a lot of that is unfortunately coming from overseas.
When you say that, where are a lot of the hotspots that you see globally?
Yeah, so Russia is probably one. I mean, one of our head of threat intels even tells us, there's videos of these ransomware gangs driving Lamborghinis in the streets, right? And so they're not really trying to hide a whole lot, but that's one hotspot I would say that we deal with pretty frequently.
And when you're talking about the amounts of some of these claims being really the driver in these losses, what are you seeing that on the small business side, or are you just seeing that for major corporations?
Sure. So that's a great question. Obviously, the larger the company, typically the larger the demand, just given their revenues, their size. But it's not just that. And we actually kind of specialize in small business. I think the second most costly band, if you look at revenues for businesses that to have these claims, are actually companies under $10 million in revenues, which is alarming. And a lot of that, we believe at Coalition, from our data collection and just threat intelligence, is because typically they maybe don't have the best security infrastructure in place. Maybe they can't afford it. So that's an area that we see get hit pretty aggressively. But for the most part, those larger companies, that's, the larger the company, the larger the payday in their eyes. For example, not to keep beating on Colonial Pipeline, but that was one, I think they paid out $5 million on that. So that was the demand. And that's what we're seeing, which is, again, it's just crazy where the market's gone. We have one of our best claims guys at the company he always recalls the day he got the first 5-figure ransomware demand. And he remembers it was, craziness. No one really knew what to do. They were kind of worried about the future. And here we are now with 6-7 figures being pretty consistent across the board. So,
and how long has this been really, for a lot of the people out there, and I know this is a question they want to know, is how long is ransomware, ransomware crime, I guess you could call it, has been going on for in regards to like a timeline?
Sure. It's a good question. To be honest, I probably don't know exactly. I'd imagine it's been going on for maybe the last decade. I just don't think it's been as prolific as it's become. Back in the day, I've only really been in the industry 5-6 years now, but back in the day, I hear the stories of they get in somewhere quick and they say, pay us $1,000 and we'll leave you alone. Yeah. Clearly that's not the case anymore. And from an insurance standpoint, it's not just the ransomware piece, but there's other coverages implicated, business interruption being one of the biggest. Just when you're down, you can't operate, you can't produce products, you can't generate revenue. That's probably even one of the larger insurance agreements that we end up paying out on as a result of that. So there's larger implications, but I would, to answer your question, I would say it's been around for some time. It just has not been to the level it's unfortunately gotten. And we think it's only going to get worse too. So.
And me and Nick were actually discussing this in last week's episode, where we brought up the topic, and I'll let Nick chime in on this, but especially in the insurance industry, you probably know this as well, that we're actually kind of running behind. We really haven't been tech savvy. A lot of operations, even major insurance companies, have been kind of running on the adage of an infrastructure from 1984, and we've seen it in the last few years where now that there's the availability of this technology finally hitting financial services, that it's just everybody's running and grabbing that shiny new object that is they're quote unquote be a part of their new tech stack, and they're not really looking at security. They're implementing, let's say, 5 new applications or 5 different new AMSs or CRMs, but they're not really paying attention to their VPNs and their antivirus software and whatnot. Nick, are you seeing that on the real estate industry, and that there's been this rapid jump towards technology in the last couple of years?
Most definitely, especially in the last year with the pandemic, the more and more companies that were brick and mortar, like some of the traditional companies that have been around forever, have been forced essentially to use technology. But like you said about insurance infrastructure from being in the 80s or whatever, 1980s, I don't think that their security and firewalls or protection is in place, just like you mentioned, in regards to insurance as well.
Yeah, and that's what's scary is we've seen this is basically like now it's kind of like adapt or die. So it's what do I do? Do I jump towards this technology and be relevant? But am I jumping into am I diving into the deep end of the pool? What are your thoughts on that, Ryan?
No, and I think it's a great question and conversation, and it's a great kind of segue into what Coalition was founded on. Our CEO really had a vision where we were spending billions and billions of dollars every year on cybersecurity, and yet the cost of claims and ransomware and breaches and all of this were in the trillions, right? You'd think those would be inversely related. And so he shifted his focus from solving cybersecurity to solving cyber risk. And one of the best ways to do that is to transfer that risk. And so we've really built a product that really is, the marriage of cybersecurity and cyber insurance, where we look at companies from a technological perspective, we look at their, security footprint and underwrite based on that, where, to the insurance industry, maybe more outdated, just paper applications, you really can't get a grasp on someone's true cyber exposure looking at a 5 to 7 page application, right? And so we've built a product and a solution where we're not only just going to offer the reactive insurance policy, we want to build in proactive security measures, whether it's risk mitigation tools, whether it's security monitoring, to actually prevent a claim from happening, on the front end. So that's really kind of Coalition's dream and vision, and that's what we're actually offering. And we always say we're only kind of 1% of the way there, so we're excited to kind of continue to build on that. But Nick, for your industry, I think it's one that is very actively targeted, just transferring funds. That's really what bad actors are often looking to do. And the funds transfer fraud is probably our second most frequent claim. And so it's definitely an industry that I think definitely needs the cyber insurance, even if it's just a policy, not through Coalition. But I think it's something that's at the forefront. And we have, again, just data that shows you get that industry gets very actively targeted just because of your day-to-day operations.
How many real estate brokerages do you see out there who are actually carrying some type of cyber liability? Is it in the single digits, or do you see it growing, or is it just underserved?
I kind of wish I'd pulled that data before this, but it's a number. We have a number of, whether it's real estate title agents, law firms, some similar in that kind of industry, but we have a lot of policyholders. Really, the funds transfer fraud coverage, I think, is one that's draws them into it most. Yeah. But we definitely have a ton of policyholders in that vein.
And do you recommend, because I got asked this question the other day, and it's a more of a relevant question that's coming up, day by day, whether it's from other insurance agents or from consumers. A lot of realtors and lenders and titles, even insurance agencies, have traditionally carried their cyber liability as a sublimit, maybe on their business owner's policy. Right. What is your recommendation, or what's the advantage of actually having a separate cyber liability policy?
Well, I think just having a standalone limit in itself is obviously beneficial to have, but I think it's really evolved. That used to suffice, but there's a lot of other coverages that wouldn't be picked up on that potentially. Standalone, there's so much that goes into a cyber policy. There's breach response costs, there's notification costs, there's the funds transfer fraud piece for that industry specifically. So I think there's just a lot of benefit to having a standalone policy. And I would say it was traditionally very cheap to get a standalone cyber policy. It's, the market's definitely hardening, and that's maybe not exactly the case, but that used to be pretty much a pretty good point is, hey, it's not that expensive to just get a standalone policy, a standalone limit that doesn't potentially erode your BOP, so your BOP, excuse me. So I think there's a lot of benefits to it from just a coverage and cost standpoint.
So they're packing in a lot of claim support along with the coverage, is what you're saying.
Correct. Yes.
Yeah, and like I said, I've gotten that question, and it's been one, and I've done my research as well, and I've seen that a lot of these companies out there who've traditionally offered it on their paper or quote unquote said they had a separate department for it when it comes to cyber liability. Again, like the Hartford, for example, they've been offering cyber liability for the last 10 years. Now, as to the size and expertise of their department, whether they cover it, yes, they probably do, but I don't think they have the expertise that a lot of these companies like Coalition out there right now have, where they are dedicated 100%, their claims efforts and everything is dedicated to this, single line of business. And I think that's important, and just not for cyber liability, but for example, like employment practices liability insurance coverage. I think, standalone policies are actually a benefit for that. And that brings up actually a great question, a topic that I saw a news brief on the other day, which is the rise in, me and Nick discussed this last week, which is the rise in claims where they're actually looking to steal bio data. And it was getting into talking about companies who have retinal scans for IDs, or, use your thumbprint to get into the actual building. And they were talking about hacker groups out there who are actually trying to steal that bio data to get back doors. Have you guys heard anything about that?
So that's something we've discussed a lot. I mean, especially in Illinois, I think they have a BIPA Act in place, and we've seen claims in the past that have been near triggering our policy. It's more suited for an EPL policy, but personally, I mean, in my role, I haven't come across that yet, but I would not be surprised that there are bad actors looking for that information, because that's something that they could probably easily generate into some type of revenue just for themselves. But it's definitely an issue that's at the forefront for us, because there's a lot of overlap where this could potentially trigger one of our insurance agreements. So it's something we discuss internally a good amount.
Interesting. That's very interesting. So let's get into some if you have some, and I know the audience always likes to hear these, are some crazy claim stories that you've heard in the past that people would not think of.
So off the top of my head, I mean, the one claim story, it's maybe not the craziest. I think it's just a great story in itself that we tell a lot. Was actually last May. So with COVID and the peak of it, everyone working remote, you can imagine the amount of phishing attacks, just bad actors trying to essentially spoof emails, get people to wire money, just skyrocketed. And we actually had a policyholder that's a nonprofit organization get hit with one of these emails where they said, hey, due to COVID, we've changed our banking information. Can you please wire the money to this account instead? Ultimately, it looked believable. It looked legitimate. They ended up wiring $1.3 million to a bad actor. 4 days later, she realized it, called Coalition. We got on the phone. And what's unique about Coalition is we have an in-house incident response and claims team, and they're honestly some of the best in the business. They're experts at what they do. And what they did was they immediately got on the phone. They worked with the insured. They called the bank. They ended up freezing the account. They got the FBI involved. We even have a few team members that are formerly FBI, so that always helps. And essentially, they were able to stop the funds from being transferred, which is very rare. A lot of other insurance carriers sometimes would just write the check, move on, it's a loss. We actually go after these funds. They ended up getting back all the funds except for $500, which is just remarkable because there's no loss there. There's no claim. We're getting the funds back for the insured. All but $500, and our CEO was very moved by it. He cut a check to the insured for $500 to donate to the nonprofit. So we just love telling it. It's a very wholesome story. We really helped out the policyholder. They're incredibly grateful. That's hopefully, a customer for life. But it really tells that these bad actors, there's kind of no limit to what they'll go after. To try and get a $1.2 million transfers is pretty insane, but they end up getting away with it. But that's where the ability to kind of claw those funds back is something that's unique about Coalition. So that's a unique claim. I'm trying to think of maybe some others off the top of my head. The only ones coming to mind are more EPL related because we just
sure.
Those are always interesting.
What about phishing? Because that's been a hot topic lately on phishing, not only for emails. I mean, I think everybody's, no matter what the business is, has experienced that. I mean, and how easy it is, especially for people on Microsoft servers, how somebody can get in, create an alias to somebody's email address and be emailing people even inside their own organization, soliciting information. Right. So, but we're seeing a lot of that, and I've noticed a lot of that just even on Facebook, on social media. Sure. That brings up a good question, because I know in the real estate market, and Nick can probably chime in on this, that realtors are using social media as probably one of their number one platforms for marketing and transacting business now. So are you seeing a lot of phishing going on in the social media world?
So yes, for sure. I mean, even at Coalition, we'll get some phishing emails internally, and we always report them, and to the team, the security team, they look into it. But yeah, I think just with more means and methods of communication, especially social media, I think there's only going to be a rise with just the attacks, the amount of attacks, just attempts really to phish. It's really just, they'll go after the way just means where they feel they can probably target and get people to best believe it. You know, Facebook, I've seen that a ton. Instagram's definitely starting to get some activity there, but I think it's really just the more technology you utilize and the more different types of social media accounts you use, bad actors are going to try and find ways to spoof people, to get people to fall for things. I get an email that I need to reset my Apple ID. I feel like, every month, and it's just, if you ever click into the actual email and look at where it's coming from, it's just, complete jargon. So I think they're just going to do it as much as they can, because there are people that unfortunately will fall for it.
It's so easy for, as you refer to bad actors to, wear these masks, especially on social media and especially on emails. And we've noticed that one of the training tools that we use for our agents are, even if it does come from, Mike, at BlanchardInsurance.com or a trusted source, I'm like, if the content of that email does not make sense, just hit reply, because open up a new email, because you will see in there that with the actual true email it's coming from, because they can use Mike at Blanchard or whatever to mask their email, and it's the same, as easy as masking a URL or anything else. So what are some tips that business owners like myself and Nick, and especially in the real estate world, can do to kind of protect themselves on the front end, even with having cyber liability insurance?
Sure. So, and again, not to just plug Coalition, but one of the benefits is we have a partnership with Curricula, which is a security awareness anti-phishing training program. They're fantastic. Our users get actually the first 15 users for free, and what they do, they have training modules on what to look for. You can even set phishing campaigns. So every 2 weeks, Mike at Blanchard Insurance gets a phished email just to keep him on his toes. If you unfortunately click it, you get sent to a training module. It's kind of a, I gotcha. So
interesting.
If you fall for a Coalition, it's not a good look, given what we do. But I would say, just kind of having that awareness. Really, if anything looks suspicious, always ask, always report it. If you have someone that's in your IT department, if you use maybe a third-party provider, if something looks a little off, I would always say ask. Right, that's the biggest thing you can do. Other things, it's just really it's tough when you're moving quickly. But one of the vectors that they'll always use is they'll change. The Blanchard, they'll change the L to a 1, right? And they'll try and get it that way. So it's tough, but just one of the things you can always do, I guess, is just to really be focused. I know it's very difficult when everyone's moving very fast and just in the standard course of the day, but just maybe more attention to detail, and where that will get easier is just through that security awareness training, just being top of mind. But I would say just those are kind of the easiest things to do.
Yeah, one of the tricks that I kind of developed myself for inter-office communication, and for clients as well, which I think has worked quite well. And I don't think a lot of people think about it doing it, but I kind of developed my own writing style, and sometimes it annoys the crap out of the people who work in my office. But and they kind of by using emojis and different words, I'll always capitalize and whatnot. Right. And they will ask me why the hell do you do that? And I go, well, one of the reasons is if you see an email come from me and it's not in that format that you're so used to, that I've been hitting you with 10 times a day for the past year, then guess what? It's probably not coming from me. That's a good tip. I mean, I think a lot of small businesses and a lot of medium-sized businesses or even large businesses could use is look at the content. Just don't click on a link or open an attachment if it doesn't look like if your gut is telling you it doesn't look like it's coming from Nick, it doesn't look like it's coming from Mike, don't open it or ask some questions.
Right.
Now, Nick, I'm curious because you recently actually got a coalition cyber liability policy. So I'm very interested on your thoughts on what the process was and, your opinion of the product.
My opinion of the product is, I think it's amazing because it was a relatively affordable plan to get for the coverage that I'm getting. I believe mine's it was $599 for $1 million coverage or something like that. And so for me, it's worth spending that money because like we're talking about now, especially social media and real estate, we also get it's amazing because we do see things like the phishing thing you're talking about, like on WhatsApp or Facebook, where people will try to make themselves look, they'll try to steal your listing information so that you could try to end up wiring money to a foreign country that they can't retrieve the money from. But also cyber liability in the ways that if one of my associates were to post something inappropriate representing the brand, that we're protected as well. Or if they click on a link that takes them somewhere that exposes the business, I feel like I can sleep better at night with peace of mind now that I have a cyber liability policy with you guys over at Coalition, Ryan. So I think it's just a peace of mind. And I don't want to get my business, since you were telling us earlier in the episode, Ryan, that they're going after smaller businesses like myself, that I want to be protected so nobody can hold my brand hostage for me to pay out money that I don't want to, give up to them or don't have, and then end up going out of business because of it.
Sure. No, it's fantastic. I mean, I'm glad to hear that you're enjoying it. That's you're one of the coalition, right? But no, it's fantastic. Everything you just described is really great to hear. I mean, that's really the intent of the product. And again, you're an industry where you are very, very targeted just because of the funds being constantly wired. I was even surprised. I got my friend back home actually said he invited me to a work networking event when in reality it was his older sister's actually a real estate agent. It was a first-time home buyer's presentation. So I was spoofed. I was duped into going. And just being a little bit younger, I didn't own a home. I was getting pretty targeted by them. But one part that I thought it was interesting to share was how in-depth they went and just to the procedures, the wiring process, how verified, how secure it is. That was one of their biggest selling points in the lending industry, which it was great to see from my perspective because that's a risk that we deal with every day. But it's just such a big part of your business that's why it's something that's a big exposure that your industry faces. So,
yeah, and to add in one of the recent claims we saw, because it wasn't even one of our claims, but it involved a lending. And I think it was actually a title company. And they were supposed to actually send out the escrow funds for a closing to the seller. And what had happened was the check, I forget, I think it just got stolen. There was no cyber liability insurance in place for the title company. So what they had to wind up doing before another check was sent out is they had to go out and actually buy a surety bond. And they had to buy it on the amount of that check. And I think it was about close to probably a couple $100K, easily, maybe even more than that. And they came to us to actually buy this bond. And they were astounded at the amount of money that they were going to have to fork up just to cover this next transfer. And I'm talking about probably not $10,000, but getting pretty close just to cover that. So if they had cyber liability insurance in place, it actually been a more affordable solution to that. Because again, they had to go out and get this bond to cover that transaction. And because of all this risk out there right now, these bonds are by no means cheap at all to get it. And so it's a very hopefully you don't never have to use your insurance. The intent is you don't want to have to use it, but it's always good to have that foresight to have coverage in place so you don't have to find these plan B options to go out there that can be very, very expensive.
Right. No, absolutely. I mean, it's unfortunately evolving into it's not a matter of if, it's when. especially in
Yes.
the market currently. And that's just, I mean, to your point, it's not as costly. And, in the event there is ever an incident, you're going to wish you had the policy in place that you mentioned. So.
Yeah, and I mean, what they've been saying, and I mean, and this is true, is everybody feels this way, is, data is the new currency. I mean, it has been for the last 5 years, and people are trying to, especially businesses, are trying to aggregate as much as possible. And what we're seeing is it's not only, personal information or financial information, but it's also social data that, a lot of businesses are acquiring now to better serve their clients from a service model, but look at new ways of marketing and look at new ways of growth. So again, with acquiring more data, and of course we're doing it just like everybody else is, yes, there is a value to that data, and you want to have the best insurance in place to protect it.
Absolutely.
Yeah. All right. So we're at the end of the show, but Ryan and Mike, and if you want to go first, Ryan, since you're our guest, I always ask my guests, well, you can make it cyber liability related. What do you recommend to anybody that listens, whether any kind of business, whether it's real estate, insurance, or anything out there?
Absolutely. I mean, sure. I would just say, if you don't have cyber liability or not in place, just get a quote, whether it's through Coalition or someone else. It's something that I think every business really should have in place, regardless of what you do. It's only more at the forefront now. But I mean, again, if you go through Coalition, I think that's fantastic. We have a lot to offer our policyholders, not just from an insurance perspective, like I mentioned throughout the show, but I just would advise all businesses to do that. And then we have, some best practices in place to just better position yourself to avoid incidents from happening. Just implement MFA, have better backups, use the password, change your password often. That's an easy one. But just if you don't have cyber, definitely get a quote or try and get a policy in place, because it's best to be prepared. So.
I guess I'll chime in next and just say that I want to touch on something that Ryan actually brought up earlier that was very interesting, is that I think a lot of people, especially probably anybody over the age of 40 nowadays, when they hear the word hacker, they probably think of, the infamous movie from the 90s, with Angelina Jolie, or they think of a 16-year-old sitting behind a computer somewhere and, like, oh, he's going to hack in, what's it going to take, $10? And then they have that idea in their head and that image of what, and they go, it's not much of a threat. Some high school kid's going to, try to steal some money for me, whatever. It's not that big of a threat. But to your point is a lot of these hacking groups, it's not a 16-year-old sitting overseas. They are sophisticated businesses. They are for-profit businesses, huge organizations that are putting a lot of money and a lot of effort into their own infrastructures to find out how to steal from you. So they're very complex organizations. Yep. So when you do have that thought that it's not going to happen to me, well, guess what? The people on the other, the people overseas doing this their intent is to steal your information, and they have the resources, and most of the time they're going to be a hell of a lot smarter than you are at what they're doing. So that's my adage, is to recognize, not only the threat, but where that threat is actually coming from.
Definitely. No, I couldn't have said it better myself. I mean, they're not looking for targets of choice. It's purely opportunity. So everything you touched on, completely agree with.
Awesome, guys. Well, Ryan, thank you for joining us on the show, and Mike, thank you for getting him on here, and thank you for being on too, Mike. But yeah, this is definitely going to be a topic for a while, and I'm going to even look in, even though I do have a cyber policy with you guys, but I'm going to look into cyber protection as well to make sure that my infrastructure as a business is protected, and not just go it alone anymore, to make sure that we are fully protected. So thank you again, guys.
No, thanks for having me. And Nick and Mike, great meeting you. And Nick, thanks for being a policyholder.
Yeah.
Oh, no worries. Thank you, Mike, too.
Yeah.
Ryan.
Thanks, guys.
All right, guys. This has been Home2All. You too. Enjoy your weekend, everybody. This has been Home2All, an all-inclusive real estate podcast. We'll see you guys next week. And thanks again, guys. Take care.
Take care, guys.
Yeah.
This has been Home2All, an all-inclusive real estate podcast. Find Nick on Facebook and Instagram at downtown.expert, and also his website, www.downtown.expert. or call or text him at 407-508-8809. Thanks for listening.
Don't spend hours or days looking for your new home. Let a downtown Central Florida expert guide you. I'm Nicholas Acosta, and I'm here to welcome you home. Being a Florida native, I know how exciting, stylish, and convenient the downtown lifestyle can be. From the nightlife scene in the heart of downtown to the natural beauty of Florida. I'm Nicholas Acosta, and I'm here to welcome you home.